There are three basic types of imperialism that we'll talk about in this course. The first type is the one you think about when you think about imperialism, political imperialism, conquering a country, ruling its land. This is what the Spanish did in the Aztec Empire. They conquered the Aztec Empire, they ruled it themselves, they're in charge. Political empire. Now there are two other kinds of empire here as well. There is economic empire, which is an empire, a type of empire that has nothing to do with politics or government, in which the only thing that is controlled is the economy. A good example of this would probably be the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, right? We don't care who runs Saudi Arabia, just so long as we get access to the oil. So we control the economy. We are their most favored trading partner. We insist that they give us good deals on oil. We don't care who their leaders are. That's the only but that is a kind of imperialism. We don't think of ourselves as having empire over Saudi Arabia, but that too is a kind of imperialism. Finally, we have cultural empire, and that is when the country controls neither the politics nor the economy of another country, but controls their culture. So a good example of this is the U.S. relationship today with China. We do not control their government. We don't even like their government. We do not control their economy. In fact, you can argue that they control our economy, at least as much as we control theirs. We do, however, have a huge influence over their culture. You go to China, you can eat at a McDonald's, you can shop at Walmart, and most famously in the 2000s, you know Tiananmen Square, where the famous symbol of the Chinese power, right next to the Forbidden City where the emperor used to live, and they had that big rebellion in 1989, and there's that famous photo of the guy standing in front of the line of tanks, and then he moves aside and the tanks go through and they crush the rebellion. Right on the corner of Tiananmen Square during the 2000s, there was a Starbucks. And that is exactly what cultural empire looks like. When you know, they may control the politics and the economy, but we control the culture. Our culture basically pervades and controls their culture. Now today that Starbucks is not there anymore because the Chinese government realized that the optics were bad, that it looks bad to have an American Starbucks on the corner of Tiananmen Square right next to the Forbidden City. But they replaced it with another local coffee shop because people wanted coffee, right? That tells you what you need to know about cultural empire, right? It's not the Starbucks, it's the very demand for coffee that is there, that is American cultural empire. So we're going to try to ask a couple of questions in this lecture. First of all, why does America all of a sudden, after being pretty isolated from the rest of the world, turn to imperialism in the 1890s, immediately after the Battle of the Standards and the end of the Depression? And second, how does imperialism change American society back home? What effect does this support for imperialism have on America and Americans? So we'll start with the motivations, American imperial ambitions, and then we'll turn to two wars. How many of you have heard of the Spanish-American War? About half. How many of you have heard of the Philippine-American War? One, two.
I haven't heard of it, but after the reading, I'm not surprised that it exists.
Makes sense. There's a reason that fewer of you have heard of the Philippine-American War than the Spanish-American War. It's not a period we're very proud of as a country. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about why we don't talk about it. But first, why do Americans embrace imperialism? Imperialism, in many ways, is a natural consequence of America's existing desires. All the things that we've been talking about leading up to this moment just sort of lead inevitably, in some ways, to American imperialism. Let's break it down. The big issue here is industrial capitalism. You're not going to be surprised by that. We've been talking about it nonstop since last week. Industrial capitalism means we produce more goods than we can sell in the U.S. We have to sell them elsewhere, outside of the country, in foreign markets. And so what industrial capitalism means, the U.S. needs export markets. The U.S. needs a place to sell our stuff in the rest of the world. Now, the U.S. has been exporting our stuff already throughout the 19th century to South America, Central America, Mexico. The U.S., this is not enough anymore. There are not enough people there to buy all the extra goods that the U.S. has. So the U.S. is looking for additional export markets. And what we discover is that in the 1890s, it's already just about too late to get access to additional export markets in the world. The Europeans had the same idea about 10 years earlier, and their solution to this problem was to conquer the rest of the world. And therefore, they could just export their stuff to it because, you know, when you've conquered a country or a territory, then you are the only person who can trade with it if you want to be. So in 1884, the European kings and queens meet in Berlin, and they divide up Africa. There are no African leaders present at this meeting. The European kings and queens divided up on their own, and they decide that France is going to get most of West Africa, Britain, this corridor, north and south, Italy, Ethiopia, Germany, these hopscotch pattern on the west and eastern coasts of sub-Saharan Africa. Yes?
Didn't that kind of happen after World War I with the Middle East, too?
They kind of did that after World War I with the Middle East. At this point, nobody cares about the Middle East because it's not clear that they have anything of value. They have oil. They have oil. Don't tell anybody. Nobody. I mean, at this point, it's not even clear that oil is of any value. Like nobody has. Industrial capitalism is running on the steam engine, which is powered by coal. It's not clear that oil matters. Pardon?
Whales.
Whales. Right. Exactly. Yeah, yes.
How fast was the steam engine?
Well, the steam engine was, I don't know about fast, but it was powerful, right? That is more of an accurate measure. And I would say that pretty quickly after Watt invents the first one in the 1810s, it gets to be just about as powerful as people need it to be. Like there's not really an upper limit on how powerful it can get. It turns out to be less efficient than. Oh, are you thinking of this like a steam railroad engine, like a train?
No, I'm thinking about like.
Oh, the actual engine? Yeah. No, I mean the issue is not the power. The issue ultimately turns out to be that it's, and we'll talk about this later, but it's less efficient to have a steam engine in every factory than it is to just have one centrally in a power plant and transfer things through electricity. So we haven't gotten there yet. So far, people are still using their own engines. So the Europeans divide up Africa, and then old Uncle Leopold walks in, Leopold II of Belgium. Nobody likes Leopold. He's kind of a jerk. And he shows up and he says, look, Belgium doesn't want any land in Africa. I tried to convince them to get land in Africa. They didn't support it. But I'm a king, and I want my own land in Africa, so give me something. And the European kings and queens look at each other, and they're like, oh, Leopold. But you know what? He is a king, so we have to give him something. And they give him the Congo Free State. And then the Europeans, having divided up Africa, set about conquering Africa. And most of them find that Africa is pretty easy to conquer. The English, the French, the Germans conquer their territories. The only one who is unsuccessful at conquering their territory is Italy, whose army is actually defeated by the king of Ethiopia, a pretty powerful ruler in Africa. So Ethiopia remains an independent country. And old Uncle Leopold, who they just gave the Congo Free State to shut him up, proceeds to engage in a genocide of 10 million people in the Congo Free State. How many people did Hitler kill? 6 million Jews. How many people total? 11. Just slightly more than that guy killed in Africa. And he doesn't kill them because he hates them racially. He kills them because he is too cheap to provide them any food or hospitals. He starves 10 million people to death. One of the great genocides of the modern era. If you want to know why the Congo is still a mess, that's why. That man is the reason. Yes?
How many people did you say he killed?
10 million people, which is, I don't know, population of Utah is about 2 million, so 5 times the state of Utah. Yeah. So the Europeans carve up Africa. They carve up Southeast Asia. U.S. is looking at this map. What's left? South America, the U.S. is already trading with, and it's not enough. What else? China. All right. Then as now, China, 1/6 of the world's population. Millions and millions of people who can buy American goods. And China is in a pretty bad way. They've been an empire for a long time, but they've decayed pretty rapidly. The British have been kind of pushing them around for the last 60 years, never formally conquered them. And at this point, the Europeans are sitting around with, this image isn't too wrong, sitting around with their scissors, getting ready to carve up China into zones of occupation in the same way they did with Africa. So into the fray steps U.S. Secretary of State John Hay, sporting some pretty distinctive facial hair here, a little beard, big mustache. And John Hay comes up with a couple of ideas for how to deal with this situation. How can the U.S. gain access to China? Well, first of all, Hay determines that the U.S. is the largest economy in the world, so therefore we don't have to conquer China. We don't need political empire in China. We can do it through free trade. If we just say that everyone has an equal access to the China market, then we will benefit the most because our economy is the biggest, we have the most stuff to sell. So then the question is how to convince all the other European countries that they should leave China alone and agree to make it an open door, as John Hay puts it, for free trade. So John Hay goes to the Russians, and he has a piece of paper in his hand, and he says, okay, here's the deal. I have here a document signed by all of the other major powers who are interested in China, except you. And the document says that they all agree that China should be an open door to free trade. The signatures are here. You can't see them, but they're here. But you can't see them, but they're here. And you don't want to be the only country that doesn't sign this document, because if you are, all the other countries will attack you. So what do you say? And the Russians sign the document. There are no other signatures on this document. Never play poker with John Hay. He will beat you. Then John Hay goes to Japan. He says, look, signature of the Russians. No, the other signatures are here too. Can't see them, but they're here. Can't see them, but they're here. And you don't want to be the only country that doesn't sign this document, or the other countries will attack you. And Japan signs the document. Then he takes the document to France. Then he takes it to Germany. Then he takes it to England. Then he puts his own signature on it, and he displays it to everyone. And everybody has signed this thing. Nobody wanted to. And now they're stuck, because now if one of them breaks the agreement, they really will be attacked by all the other countries. So he has succeeded in making China an open door for free trade. Problem solved. Economic empire achieved. Okay. Now here's where the problem begins. This man, Alfred Thayer Mahan, professor at the Naval War College, professor of naval history. Mahan writes a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And he's looking at basically, all those pirates in the golden age of piracy that we talked about. He says, look, having territory is one thing, controlling an economy is one thing. It doesn't do you any good unless you can protect the convoys carrying the money and the goods to and from China. He says you need naval bases, you need naval protection, or pirates will appear and steal all of your stuff. And to get those naval bases, says Mahan, you have to conquer islands. Islands between here and China to protect the China market. So you see how this is already pivoted from economic empire to political empire. Now we have to go conquer something. We have to conquer islands. Now that's not it. It's not just these sort of political economic concerns. There's also manifest destiny, this idea that America has a civilizing mission for the rest of the world. It's America's goal to civilize all the world because we are God's chosen people. And previously this applied mostly to North America, but it can apply anywhere. America has a God-given right to civilize these islands that we might want to conquer.